everyone knows about. Everyone plays games, and it was kind of my dream when I was younger for that to be true. But now that it's happened, I just can't come to terms with it.
Hello and welcome to Why Button, the podcast that asks why we care about video games. I'm your host, Kyle Starr. On this show, I interview creators, enthusiasts, journalists, and media personalities about their origins with video games, what keeps them so interested in the medium, and what excites them about the future. On this episode, I chat with Robert Ashley, host of the legendary internet radio show A Life Well Wasted. Years ago, I was turned on to A Life Well Wasted, and it changed my career trajectory, enthusiasm for video game journalism, and how I saw video games as a whole. In this episode, Robert and I certainly talk about A Life Well Wasted and video games, but we also get into music, food, parenting, all with the goal of asking why we care about video games. This was a very special episode for me. I'm still pinching myself that I got Robert on the show. So I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. It was like a dream come true, as evidenced by the A Life Well Wasted poster behind me in my studio.
I'm seeing a pretty fancy poster back there. It's looking pretty nice. It actually looks exactly like my copy of it. Like you have the same frame somehow.
Oh my God.
Yeah. That's cool.
That's amazing. I didn't want it to be too awkward, but it's like you can't wear your favorite band or the band you're going to see. You can't wear the shirt to the show, right? That's kind of where I am with this. Like, how are you going to react to the poster of your work right behind me? But
well, luckily I didn't draw the poster, so it feels less weird. I'm struggling to get the poster orders filled. It's such a massive job, and I haven't had time because I've been busy doing I somehow landed all this other podcasting work, which is distracting me right now. But I like to have money, so
yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I'm curious about that. I'm actually, why don't I just jump into it? And then, that's actually a great way to sort of start is what you're up to. But Robert Ashley, thanks for joining me on Why Button. The premise of the show is to ask why we even care about video games to begin with. And you are a large inspiration for where the show came from. We can get into that in a bit. So I guess first and foremost, thank you. But I really wanted to have you on the show because you seem to have some interest in games, and I'd like to kind of pick at that a little bit. I think our listeners probably know you best from your extensive VO work on Super Brothers Sword and Sorcery EP.
Huh? Hey.
But I think you have some. You do a few other things as well, and I'm sort of curious. I guess introduce yourself for folks who may not know you.
Yeah, my name's Robert Ashley. I have done many random things over the course of my 44 years. For a long time, I was living in the Bay Area in California and worked for a bunch of video game magazines that were out of the Ziff Davis office there. And that's kind of where I started getting into this stuff. There was a very early podcast there called GFW Radio, because there was a magazine called Computer Gaming World that had been around for 25 years or something. And then Microsoft bought it and rebranded it when they decided to have that Games for Windows initiative that, destroyed Steam and made a lot of money for Microsoft. Or no, actually it didn't. It failed miserably. But they renamed the magazine to that, and we had this podcast, and that's how I got into the podcasting thing, because there was just a bunch of people showing up to listen to that thing, and I was baffled by it. I was like, why? I did all this work for the magazine. I would never hear back about the cover story that I had spent 20 hours writing, but you go on GFW Radio and make a dumb joke about Yaddle and Star Wars, and people are like and typing on the message boards.
Yeah.
And so I took that as a signal that maybe the podcasting thing is a place to be, and I've always been a fan of radio. I was very into NPR in my youth, I guess. I would do some temp jobs, filing files in medical offices, and I would have my headphones and just listen to NPR and shows like This American Life, Radio Lab was later, but you know what I'm saying? I got into that stuff, and I was already playing in bands and recording bands because I had all this gear, and so I started doing podcasting and stuff, and that's kind of where I made more of a name for myself, if I ever have so far. But you mentioned Super Brothers. That's funny. Craig, the guy who created that game, he was a fan of A Life Well Wasted, my video game show that I eventually came up with, and he asked me to just improv some things for that game. And then that game ended up being like a pretty big iPhone game. I mean, it was like one of those games that everyone bought. So if you ever play it, you can hear me randomly like coming up with some I remember like something that I came up with about like, hey, do you like blood sports? Like some strange line of dialogue that I came up with. There's not a lot of speaking in that game, but I also did some vocal work for his newish game, Jet. I don't know if you played that. Yeah.
I was curious about that.
It's a whole different thing. You know, the first game was kind of a traditional adventure game in some ways, and Jet is this exploration game that's a lot more ambitious, and it has like a fictional language that someone there helped create this language based somewhat on the idea of the sacred harp music.
Sacred harp singing is communal singing using a form of notation we call shape note notation, where each degree of the scale has a particular shape associated with it, and it's sung in 4-part harmony most of the time. Triangle for fa, oval for sol, rectangle for la, and then a diamond for mi. Fa, sol, la, mi, fa.
It's this like full American folk tradition that you know, groups of singers would get together and do these like singing in the round things, and they tried to do all this really ambitious stuff, and it's a cool game, but it's a little hard to wrap your head around compared to Sword and Sorcery, which was very accessible but
weird. Like it is one of
super weird. Yeah,
one of like my favorite, I think, games experiences. Period. It's one of those you can't put down because you don't know what's around the corner. You don't know what kind of, like, I wouldn't even call it a mystery, but you don't know what it's going to do or how it's going to feel. It sort of starts out as like a Zelda, like a dark Zelda kind of vibe. But then, yeah, you've got somebody asking you about playing blood sports randomly. And then you're like, what is this game? You got to work with the moon cycle and stuff. And it's tweeting things out. It's very bizarre. But
the tweeting, that was you know, that's something that'll never be recreated. People talk about game preservation, but there was this strange time when Twitter wasn't evil yet, and people were incorporating Twitter into their game designs. And it also happened to coincide with that moment when there were lots of cool, interesting ideas happening on the iPhone for games. There were like 2 or 3 years where, I mean, I was really focused on that stuff for a long time as a player. And yeah, that game would tweet out. There were certain moments where you could tweet, you know, from the game, and it kind of let everyone know where you were in the game, and was also like pretty solid marketing. So
yeah,
it was a good idea.
Back to you. So I do want to get into A Life Well Wasted, because truthfully, that's what introduced me to you and your work, and again, it helped inspire this podcast and a lot of what I do. Even really truly got me into podcasting, which there's a whole career trajectory for me there that I won't really go into. But so thank you for inspiring part of my career, I think, at some level. But you also have a cooking show, A Life Well Tasted, right? I'm just curious, how serious is that? I mean, and why you got into food, obviously. And
well, we're all into food or we die, but
true. Some like better food than others, though. So
true. Yeah, I've actually always been into cooking. I was a only child. I stayed home alone from an early age, and I have lots of fond memories of almost setting the house on fire, trying to figure out how to cook when I was, I don't know, 8. Nice. But I've always cooked, and I was always pretty serious about it. When I talked about moving to the San Francisco Bay Area, we lived in Berkeley for 6 years, right down the street from this amazing grocery store called the Berkeley Bowl. And I got like heavily into all the Berkeley like cookbooks and all the Chez Panisse and all that stuff. And I've just always been really into cooking. We don't really eat out much, especially now that we live in Norman, Oklahoma. Not to like crap on it, but it's just there's not a ton of places that I want to eat out all the time.
Sure, yeah.
So I like to cook at home, and the show was really just one of those pandemic things. And I had all this time, and I was having a really hard time working on A Life Well Wasted. getting anything done that I wanted to get done. And I found that I was spending like 5 hours a day in the kitchen already. So I just bought a GoPro, sort of inspired by Kenji Lopez, who was doing head mounted cooking videos. I don't really like being on camera much. So the idea of like just see my point of view is much more comfortable for me. And I made a bunch of those videos, and they were low low viewership. If they had caught on, maybe I would have like continued to experiment with it. But as it was, I felt like I cooked a lot of the things that I was interested in cooking on camera. And then at that same time, it was about right when I started looking into TikTok and all the cooking stuff on that. And I just started to feel like, oh my God, I can't do this. Like the level of production that goes into cooking videos is just insane. I mean, I don't even want to try to compete on that level. So I still cook all the time though.
Yeah, I checked out, once TikTok came around, I was there's just no way. Like, it's wild. Like, the amount of time spent making those things, and I don't know what the ROI is on it. We don't need to go on a tangent about TikTok, but it's wild what how people are leveraging that platform or producing content in that platform.
Or not. I mean, I really don't know how much reward people are getting for all that all the time. And yeah, I think younger people seem to really value attention. And I don't mean it in a bad way. I just mean like maybe people my age were after being respected by a certain like crew of elites or something. But now like people want numbers. They want, if they're out for like if they want to win in the social world, it's like a numbers game. It's not about like, well, I know this guy at the New Yorker. It's like, I got, 1 billion views, and that's just a whole other world. And I hope that they make money for themselves and not just for the platform holder.
Yeah. Well, speaking of production and numbers and whatnot, I think that helps me steer into a Life Well Wasted a bit. So, you started A Life Well Wasted, the podcast. You call it an internet radio show at the time. I don't know if the term podcasting was pervasive or you're just being cheeky when you launched it, but it was 2009. That was the previous recession, actually. The first episode kicks off with the death of EGM.
Even the name sounds old and irrelevant. Electronic Gaming Monthly. It was a magazine for nerds. Sure, they tried to bury the name.
The production value is, I think, through the roof. In terms of early podcasting, it certainly stands toe-to-toe with things like This American Life and Radio Lab and whatnot. That very high production. You and your band are scoring the content or the shows. So it has its own unique soundtrack and remixing inside of the production as well.
All was well until it wasn't. When the magazine closed earlier this month.
But then all of a sudden it sort of starts tapering off. Like you put out a couple episodes in 2010, kind of went through a hiatus into 2013. Another episode pops out and then hiatus again. And then you're back 10 years later. So I'm sort of curious why you even started. You touched on it a little bit, but why you even started A Life Well Wasted to begin with.
Yeah, well, so yeah, going back to the magazine stuff, like you said, the first episode is the death of EGM. EGM was this magazine that I read since I was a kid. Electronic Gaming Monthly. I used to, ask my mom to buy it for me at the grocery store when I was, 10 years old or something. I always read it. I knew all the writers who worked there by name just from being a reader. I had always wanted to work there. And I actually, when I was in college, I had majored in English. I didn't really have like a career in mind, but I ended up writing for the school newspaper at the University of Texas called the Daily Texan. And I became the music editor there and was like, I want to write about games. And I just started, writing to all the game companies and getting stuff. Anyway, I that's how I sort of broke into the magazines, and it was the job that I wanted to do most. But then, of course, like you said, the recession hit, and we all know what happens in media whenever shit hits the fan. It just, everything closes, everyone loses their job. It was terrible and it was sad. And I had already been playing around with some radio stuff because I thought like maybe that would be a place for me to go out of the disaster of gaming media at the time. I had been trying to pitch stories to some like NPR shows, like Studio 360 was a show that used to exist.
Yeah,
it wasn't
sure.
NPR, it's like PRI. And I'd been playing around with it. And basically I decided to just have a go at making my own show the way that I would like to hear it. and I used the occasion of going to a party that was happening in the Mission in San Francisco after the magazine closed. It was just like, all the people who had worked there getting hammered and hanging out. And I brought my recorder and took people up to the roof and talked to them about the magazine and put it together. It probably took, the actual like editing the episode and adding music and all that stuff for that one probably took 16 hours or something. It was like the easiest one. And every episode since, I would sort of raise the stakes on myself to do more. I wanted to, I wanted to like push myself to try all kinds of crazy stuff that I was interested in trying.
I am Babsia, and I play games as fast as possible without looking at the screen.
You know how much I love introducing you all to things that you've never seen before? Well, now I get to introduce you all to something that the runner isn't even going to get to see at all. Super Mario 64, 70 stars, blindfolded. Babsia is ready. Let's go over to the run.
That's how it remains today. I wouldn't say after all these years that there are things that I'm desperate to try that are like more laborious. I'm not trying to like labor over it more. And now I'm more just focused on being good on the mic, like trying to be myself when I need to talk, which is something that I struggle with when you're alone in a room and you're talking to a microphone. Like how do you be yourself? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm doing sort of the same with this. Like it was a way, I wanted to get my voice out there, but I also had reservations about doing that. And I think the conversation is one thing. And I feel like I'm maybe getting better at doing this more naturally and then being less scripted and just kind of letting it flow. You said something interesting when we were going back and forth in email of just like, basically just let it happen. Like no questions. Let's just see how this goes, which is great. But when I'm doing the intros and outros, I do a custom intro and outro for the show. I do feel that awkwardness of like, am I acting right now or am I being myself or what, what is this? So it takes practice, right? I talked about this on one of the previous episodes that a lot of people just say, podcasting seems so easy, set up a mic and just talk. And that's not really it at all. You're thinking in your head about how you're navigating the conversation. How are you like moving from one thing to another and making something that feels good for the listener, but also is not a waste of your time or a waste of my time or, it's sort of an art, right? And it takes practice. So.
Well, I think that's why like the early successes in podcasting were all comedians. I think comedians train themselves to just like ramble, talk to yourself, talk out loud, like you're speaking to someone, even though you're really not. You're just talking to a room full of people, right? Mm-hmm. Like it's a hard thing to get into that mode where you're really acting as you would with your friends. I really try. Sometimes this last one, I have a friend of mine, Grant, that I work with on other podcast stuff. And whenever I was feeling like too self-conscious or like too scripted or whatever, sometimes I'd call and be like, man, I can't like I can't find my voice and just talk to him for a minute. Cause it's so weird. It's really weird to be in a room talking by yourself. It's strange.
It is strange. And to that point with the show, you're investing. So let's say 16 hours with that first episode, talking to yourself, scoring this thing. I want to ask you about the music too and your band, and you continue to raise the stakes and the production value and seemingly, and maybe this isn't it at all, but putting more, I guess, some investment into the show that's making things take a little bit longer and then sort of maybe fizzling out, coming back, losing inspiration, that inspiration coming back again. You mentioned struggling with it during the pandemic a little bit. To get to the, I guess, heart of the question, why? Are you doing this for the sake of the show and radio and finding your voice and all of that? Or does games have anything to do with it? Is it still a deep interest in that world? Or is this just a subject matter that you have, and so it's a sort of a vehicle for the other bits of it?
Yeah. I mean, as far as subject matter goes, I go back and forth whether or not I find video games as a subject to be like constricting, restrictive, or like too narrow, or whether it's just like nice to have a beat. Because, you could tell a story about anything in the world. I'd be lying if I said it didn't have to do somewhat with the fact that like the audience for things about gaming is just really good.
Sure, yeah.
Like you want to go put a show out about music or, novels or I don't know, whatever you can come up with cooking, it's much more daunting to me. Whereas since I'm already on the inside on games and I sort of know the subject and I have some of those people, it's a lot easier to find an audience for stories like that. But I continue to be a big, huge game nerd myself, and so I stay interested in that way. And I like to push the boundaries of what constitutes a story about games. Like sometimes
Yeah.
sometimes it's not really much of a doesn't have much to do with games.
Thinking of one episode in particular, but
yeah. There's an episode. There's a story in episode 6.
Yes.
With Jonah Falcon, who was a blogger, a video game blogger. So there's a connection there, but he's really just famous for kind of broadcasting to the world that he has the world's largest penis. And I found him to be just an interesting person, and I wanted to do a profile on him, and that's what I did.
In case you missed it, Jonah Falcon, GameStooge.com blogger, freelance games journalist, and self-proclaimed geek, has a 13.5-inch penis, touted by some as the largest penis in the world. Talk to Jonah for a bit, and you'll definitely hear about it.
I definitely got some feedback like, what does this have to do with games? There's always been a crowd of people who would listen to my show and really want it to be like an investigation of a topic. Like,
Sure.
You come up with a name and then you investigate it. Whereas my process has always been, I'm just looking for good stories. And then when I find an idea that can hold those stories together, like, oh, 3 of these things work together in this, then I'm going to call it this. It's not like a exhaustive investigation of an idea. That's not really my style. I just want a good story.
I'm Jonah Falcon. I'm a super hung games journalist.
I think maybe part of that too is you are in some regard, I think, focusing on a part of the industry or games that is not often talked about. And I think people appreciate that level of detail or that perspective on something that's maybe outside of games. That's certainly what I do. The show, I don't really focus on games per se. I may ask, what's your favorite game, or what games are you currently playing, or what sort of like sparked your inspiration and passion for games. But it's more about like on the edges, like, again, why do we even care about this? And I think your show sort of was really kind of poking at that on a more like psychological level about why we as a society even have any fascination with this. And so when you're not actually covering that, I imagine listeners might go, this is not what I'm here for, but it's still interesting. Again, if you're not into what the story is, I'm into it for the production value. Like,
I think leaving the San Francisco Bay Area made it harder for me to find those kinds of stories and to focus on those subjects.
Oh, sure, yeah.
And those first few episodes, I was really still like coming out of being in the games media and feeling that freedom to tell whatever story I'd wanted to tell, because I'd been writing for so long in a way where it would be like, do you want to go to China and visit a studio in China and see the game there? Yeah, I want to. And you go there and you get on the plane and you do all this stuff and it's really cool and you meet all these people, and then you come home and it's just like what they want you to write about is like, tell me all the guns you can use in this game and like, right, describe the gameplay. It was just like a boring take on what had so much more possibility for me, to me, seemingly. So I wanted to do those kinds of stories because I just couldn't do them in magazines. I probably just haven't really come across those kinds of topics in the same way, but I make sure I feel like there's a certain alchemy to each episode where I want a certain amount of, I don't know, maybe beard scratchy intellectual shit about video games, and then some like real, a story that's more of a human interest story that has more feeling to it, that's just more about people. I like funny, I like sad, I need a lot of energy and movement, and that's kind of why there's so much music in it. I've always felt like when I'm making something like that after a couple of minutes of just pure plain audio, then I'm starting to tune out. I'm always wanting to like get people's attention totally, like 100%, like focus entirely on this. Don't tune it out. That's the kind of radio that I'm after, like fully immersive, I guess. It's something that I only feel like about my own work. When I listen to someone else's podcast or whatever. I can listen to an interview. I don't have ADD. It's just my own my own feeling about it when I'm trying to make radio is I need like more.
And speaking of more, so you had, and life gets in the way. I'll start there. But like, again, you released a handful of episodes. I think 5 episodes in 2009. And then there was a little bit of a lull and then into 2010, like, and then the bigger lulls, 2013, 2023. What happened in that space there with the show in particular?
Yeah, the lull between episodes 6 and 7 was moving to Athens, Georgia with my bandmate and my wife, because she had graduated from Cal, where she was getting her PhD, and got an academic job in Athens, Georgia, which is a big music town. It was right after I Come to Shanghai. My band had put out an album during that weird time period where there was like a download for free, name your own price thing. Like Radiohead did it, and then it was like a thing to do for a year or two, and we actually like managed to pull in a decent amount of money so that we could focus on music full time. And I had this feeling, partly because of the podcast of A Life Well Wasted, where I was like, man, I really made this happen. Like this works. Now I'm going to do this with music. You know, that was my feeling. And that didn't really work out like that. But I focused just entirely on music for quite a while. But I did manage to get another episode out. What was that? 2013? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right before my first kid was born.
Oh, okay.
And so in the brand new episode, brand new by A Life Well Wasted standards, released December of last year, 4 months ago, there's a story in there where I was hanging out at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco. I'd actually like flown there specifically because I wanted to get material to work on a new episode. And I can remember walking down the street there and like talking to my wife on the phone and her telling me that she was pregnant. And so that was really like, that was the thing that kind of stopped my podcasting for a while. It could also have been the fact that I was mired in an enormous double album fiasco with my bandmate, trying to once again like up the stakes and finally prove to the world that I Come to Shanghai should be heard. And it just got way out of control and took 4 or 5 years. It was insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first of all, kids will do that. I'm the crazy one who's deciding to start a podcast shortly after having our first kid. She's 11 months now, but it's definitely all consuming, and you know that when talking to parents saying, well, appreciate your time now because you're not going to have it. And yes, I get that. I was hoping I could squeeze some things in here and there, but truthfully, it's like at least the stage in their life, you have to have an eye on them at all time. And so trading off with, my wife and I, she's giving me time to do this show on top of work and anything else I want to do. It's tough. And so I totally get that. It's much easier to just drop that focus on family, which is, I think the wise and the right thing to do. So that's.
Yeah. And really my wife had been focused on becoming an academic, and she really she got into the position of being the person bringing home the bacon. So I was like really dadding it. There were a couple of years where, I was still going to the studio and working on music, but I was taking care of my first kid like all the time. And it was fun. It was a fun time. I don't regret it in any way. I did learn over time that you can get more done with kids around if you really, really do it. Like you just have to force it. I did a lot of work on this latest episode where, I used to have a studio space with nice monitors set up like perfectly with all this audio treatment on the walls and the corners and all the gear and the low lights, and it was I was ready for the Instagram post, but I wasn't getting shit done. And I finally I have this half basement where it's really the family room where the TV is, and I'm just jammed in the corner. And I did a lot of work on the show where my kids were just like playing video games on the TV right next to me and talking and being loud. And you just have to power through it.
Totally. Yeah. You can get mired in all the gear and stuff too. I'm the same way with music. There's a guitar on my wall right there and a bass right next to it and guitars in the closet and stuff. And in all honesty, I haven't touched it in months or a year at this point. And it's just like, but I still will stare at pedals and I'll buy pedals and I'm never touching any of this stuff.
You're hoping the gear will bring you back in.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. Focusing on your band real quick. Is I Come to Shanghai still around? You guys still working on stuff?
No, I mean, I would be surprised if we played again. He lives in Athens, Georgia. I live in Norman, Oklahoma. We didn't end on like bad terms or anything. Okay. And I have all the records, like they're in my garage. People still order records. Like I get like a record order like once every 2 weeks, and I'll go to my giant pile of records and pull one out and be like, one more down.
I'll put it in order after this show. I promise. I've actually been meaning to be honest, but yeah.
You'll make a small dent in the armada of records that I have in my garage. But yeah, no, I still make music though. I've actually, my kids have gotten me back in a cool way because my kids are super musical. Like I never expected this, but they are like so into music, demandingly into music. And we jam and we play. My 9-year-old Theo, he's a kind of crazy piano player. I mean, whoa. I've been playing piano a lot, mainly just keeping up with him. It got me really like working on my reading and music theory and that sort of thing. I'd say like I'm kind of a self-taught guy in music. Sure, yeah. The dude that I worked with like went to school for it and everything. And so we had this nice combo of like primitive and schooled going on. But now I've been going to school partly because my son is so into it. And I play a ton of piano, really. Play a ton of drums. I still, the podcast gives me an excuse to want to record. That last experience with making an album made me really not like recording much. So I've been focused just sort of like playing in the room. I don't necessarily want to like lay things down or develop them in a vertical way. Since I can play like all the instruments, I used to always, I'm going to make a big old song and I'm going to play every instrument on it. And now I'm more focused on what I can do just in a room by myself with an eye toward performing, which I'd like to do more, but have not yet. But yeah, I'm still working on that. I mean, I wanted to make records from an early time. And I mean, I was in bands and we would go and record in studios, and I liked going to studios and recording, but I loved the idea of like one-man bands. I was very inspired, I remember, by the Microphones, Phil Elvrum's band. The Microphones is this like lo-fi project. He's more famous now for his own solo stuff, but he would go into the studio for that record label K or whatever, and they had analog gear, and he played everything and would just make these crazy lo-fi wall of sound songs. I drove up to the city. When I heard it, I was like, oh, I can do this. Or even like there's a famous Guided by Voices album, B1000, that was all recorded on a 4-track. And that made me also like, because I had a 4-track and I got into it that way. Yes, they always do. I'd be bored, disappointed if they didn't. But I finally became like a decent musician over years of recording and just having to play well enough to record, that now I'm more attracted to the idea of like playing with people. But being 44 in Norman, Oklahoma isn't really a great way to meet people to like play music with. Unfortunately,
sure. We've got the technology now to do it though. Record yourself, loop things, all that sort of stuff. You can pull it off.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's where I'm comfortable. I feel comfortable with recording, being the one-man band.
Yeah. You mentioned something earlier. This is a pivot from music, but you mentioned something earlier about the audience for games. I was thinking like, why do you think that is? Why do you think games as an audience is so interested, engaged, ravenous? I don't know what word to use, but like... Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it too. But maybe I'm also just like in my own silo and I'm missing engagement on the other in other places. But I do feel like the excitement and enthusiasm and passion around games is different.
It's not just excitement and enthusiasm though. It's economic. I mean, I don't have data to back this up, but I have a strong sense that the gaming audience is educated and makes good money. Lots of college grads and with money to spare and an enjoyment of games that knows no bounds. And really, it's one of those things that people identify with so personally that they like to buy not just games but also things that objects and clothes and all kinds of signifiers of culture. It's like a subculture. It reminds me a lot of music. If you go back to the 90s or the early 2000s when people were still spending money on music, and there was a strong culture of bragging about who you've been to see, like with the shows you've seen. I feel like that kind of left in the streaming era when people stopped spending money on music in general. It used to be kind of a signifier of who you were. You would spend all your money to try to be part of the crowd, right? And
or to find that band, to be the one that you brought it to everybody's attention, right? That was your
thing. Video games remains this place where people are just willing to spend a lot of money and time there. And the thing that I have been sleeping on that I'm only coming to terms with now is that video games are just so mainstream now. Like they're such a big part of just mainstream culture. Like I've always approached it as a niche subject to the point of where when I make, my show, I've always made it in a way where I really didn't want it to be for a niche audience. I wanted anyone, like if you didn't care about games, you'd still be able to get something from it if you listen to it. And I find that now you kind of like don't even have to think about it in that way anymore because it's just such a huge subject that everyone knows about. Everyone plays games, and it was kind of my dream when I was younger for that to be true. But now that it's happened, I just can't come to terms with it. It's strange. I meet kids on the playground who are like 8 years old who play NES games. Like there's just such a strong, deep culture of gaming knowledge. Like if you're a geek for games as a kid now, you're going like into the back catalog. It's like music to me in the same way that when you get into music, you go backwards. You gotta hear the Beatles. You gotta hear Miles Davis. You gotta like travel back in time and understand. And I meet more and more young people who have that attitude about it, and I think that's super cool. I'm blown away that there's such an interest. It's not just like mindless BS. Like what we saw the other day, me and my kid, we watched Free Guy, that movie.
Sure, yeah, Ryan Reynolds,
GTA. We watched that, and I thought that was such a weird idea of what games culture is because it was all very like just boom boom, like everyone wants to go on and just blow stuff up. That doesn't actually seem like the culture that exists now. Maybe if you're like a teenage boy, but there's just a lot more love of like the whole history of games going on.
Yeah, it's funny you say that too. Again, this show, not to be super self-referential every now and then, but I was trying to figure out what the angle was, how I'd want to talk about games. I wanted a show about games, but there's so many of them out there. And I was, funny enough, listening to, my wife listens to Smartlist, the podcast with Jason Bateman and Will Arnett and Sean Hayes, and it was like a pandemic project for them. They had Rian Johnson on the episode, director of one of the new Star Wars movies and what's the Knives Out and whatnot. And all of a sudden in that episode, he and one of the hosts, Will Arnett, started talking about games. And it was just like this moment where I was like, I had that epiphany, not even an epiphany then, because I've had it before, but it was like a really striking moment for me where it's like these two huge, this huge director, this huge actor are talking about their love for games and what makes them unique. I forget which games they started talking about, but it wasn't just like Call of Duty and whatnot. They started talking about more, I would assume, niche titles or indie titles too. And it just was shocking to me, like, because in my head as well, growing up with it, feeling like it was a niche medium, it's interesting to see it everywhere. I mean, there's the Mario movie that came out is just like going that gangbusters.
Blew my mind. It's
insane, right?
And just the movie itself, it's like I couldn't believe they made this movie because I mean it's literally just like, okay, in this scene Mario gets power-ups. It's like the most video gamey version of a video game movie I could ever imagine. They just really tried to use everything. I mean, they use your memories and your joy of having played these games as the movie itself. There's not, if you hadn't had that connection already, I don't know what someone thinks watching that movie who doesn't know Mario, because it just must be like impenetrable. It's just a series of references, and the fact that like he's got to get power ups to win the battles, and all this stuff that never would have flown in a movie about video games 10 years ago. It's so strange, but yeah, I mean it's fantastic that games have found this audience. I mean, it doesn't change the fact that for me, when I was growing up, I felt like a huge fucking weirdo, for being so involved in this stuff. It was not cool at all, man. But I mean, I feel good for the young folks who don't have to deal with that.
Yeah. What was your sort of first memories of games? What were some of those games that you recall growing up with?
My parents divorced when I was really young, and so my first memories of games would be like going to visit my dad on the weekend, and he would take me to this place in Dallas called Sharky's Pool Hall, and during the day, and he would just like fill my pockets with quarters while he played pool and drank beer at the bar. And I played stuff like Frogger and Miss Pac-Man and all those like arcade classics, Defender, games that were really hard. If you were like an 8-year-old kid and you're playing Defender, you put a quarter in, it's gone in 30 seconds, and you got to put another quarter in. And luckily my dad really liked to play pool, so I got a lot of quarters. And all my early memories were arcade games, and then I got an NES for my 8th birthday at Pizza Hut.
Nice. Of all places. What a
places.
90s dream. Yeah, 80s, 90s dream. Right
80s,
there.
It was 80s because it was like 88 or 87. It was before Pepsi bought them, It was a pre-Pepsi Pizza Hut, and I used to wake up early in the morning so that I could play Mario before school. I'd wake up at like 6 in the morning and just play Mario for an hour and a half and then go to school. Anything I could get my hands on when it came to games was huge for me. Friends who had stuff, I was at their house all the time. I was always super attracted to it, and I was always into the magazines. Even before Electronic Gaming Monthly, I used to buy something called Video Games and Computer Entertainment, which was really, really, really nerdy. But, I just wanted to know everything about it.
Yeah. What is your current relationship with games today? Are you playing much? I mean, with your kids maybe, or just on your own?
I mean, I play when I can on my own. It's hard for me, but I'm a good finisher of games. I went through a period when I was a little bit younger in my 30s where I dallied a lot and like never finished anything, and I hated it. So now I really stick with games even when they take me forever to finish. But I play a lot of indie stuff. I play Steam Deck probably more than anything, because my best time for playing games is probably just like laying in bed right before I fall asleep. I get like 30 minutes in. But I do play with my kids. We have like an ongoing Mario Kart situation where we play after dinner all the time. And I don't let my kids win. I'm evil like that. And I find that my 9-year-old is really getting good. I mean, he can beat me like 1 out of every 8 races now. He gets furious though. He's so frustrated that like he can't dominate me, or that he can't consistently win. But I mean, he's learning.
You're teaching them how to be competitive, this, right? Like,
yeah, man, I'm not going to throw Mario Kart. Actually, I did throw Mario Kart when he was first learning. I used to like hang out behind him and use all the weapons to hold off the people behind so that he could get first place.
That's a good dad right there. Yeah.
Yeah. But then he played enough by himself and figured out how to drift to the point where it's like he has his levels. But yeah, I mean, I wish I could play more, but I find that there are other things, not just the kids, but just other things in life that I like to spend my time on. Like I probably spend like twice as much time playing the piano as I spend playing video games. And I just like piano more. If I have to divide up my time that way, then I'm just going to play more piano. But I definitely bounce off of certain games that I want to play. Like I tried a little bit of Elden Ring. I probably put like 10 hours into it and was like, man, I don't have a life for this. It doesn't work with my life.
Yeah, that's the other interesting thing with games too. I'm sure that's the case with other mediums and whatnot, but games aren't as accessible as music, like throwing on a record or throwing on a song for 3 minutes because somebody's talking about it, right? But I still get some enjoyment out of games even when I'm not playing, and I don't truthfully, I don't play that much. Again, another reason for this podcast, but I still have that like insatiable appetite where I just want to hear about it. All the podcasts I listen to, all the news media I'm reading is all about games. And I'm like, why does that matter to me so much? Even if I'm not playing these or never will. And I had the same experience with Elden Ring, right? I probably put 5 to 10 hours into it. I'm just like, I don't have a life for this right now. I wish I did, and maybe I'll keep chipping away at it, but like, it's just not there anymore.
There's only time for so much in your life. It is interesting that games have created this space where there are lots of people who just watch them. Like,
sure,
that's something that I never understood, but I was never a co-pilot. Like, I had this word when I was younger I had friends who were like, they were co-pilots, like friends who would come over and watch you play a video game. I mean, I had some friends in high school that I don't think ever played a game, but watched me play video games for like 20 hours a week, and that's just how they liked it. They didn't want to play. They didn't ask to play. They just wanted to watch me play. Yeah. And there's always been a contingent of people who got their jollies in that way. I know my nephew, who's 30, spends more time watching things on Twitch than he plays himself. I think he only plays like World of Warcraft, but he watches tons of stuff on Twitch.
For you specifically, what is that interest for? Like, what keeps you interested in games if you're not playing, if you're doing things that are, arguably healthier, like playing piano and whatnot? What is it that keeps drawing you back to games anyway, or even making a podcast, a highly produced podcast about games? Like, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, in some sense, it's just, you choose your tribe and then you're there, you're like, this is your family, this is your home. I have to keep vigilant watch out in case there's something that I absolutely have to play, which I will. If something comes along, like, it's like when Breath of the Wild came out, I have time for that, and maybe I'll have time for the new one too. If there's a game that's really gonna like rock my world, then I'm gonna play it, Yeah. But in the meantime, I just sort of, I keep my ear to the ground. And I mean, I don't want to undersell how many games I do play. I probably finished 8 or 9 games last year. I mean, some of them were shortish, and that's probably why I play so many indie things, just because they have a little bit more adult running times than some of the huge AAA games. But I do play, and I love a good game. In the same way that I love a good book. Something special happens. It's an alchemy of the mind when you're like fully involved in something. I'm playing Metroid Prime right now, the remaster, which I've found that I've made time to play, and that's one of my favorite games ever. And even though I have yet to encounter anything in it that I didn't remember pretty much with 100% accuracy, I still love the feeling of unlocking all those doors and finding all those power-ups, and just the methodical way that you go about something. It's like Tetris, like the organizing of shapes. There's something that your mind loves to do with interactive experiences where you see the thing and you're like, okay, now I'm gonna make it happen. I'm gonna sort it all out. I'm gonna check off all the boxes on my list. But I think that's kind of an adult or an old man style of gaming. I see my kids playing games, and like my 9-year-old is obsessed with Breath of the Wild. I gave it to him for his birthday this year, and watching him play it is just so different than how when I played that game, I was like, okay, here we go. Let's go mountain to mountain. Let's get to the next lookout, the next tower. Let's unlock the map. Let's get all the power-ups. Let's beat all the shrines. He just like straight up wanted to explore the world. And I recognized that a game that I thought of as being kind of adult marketed or adult coded was actually obviously a game for kids. It's in some ways the most accessible Zelda game ever made. You don't really have to fight that much if you don't want to. Combat's hard. You could just skirt around all that shit. And it's basically just a big, open, beautiful backyard. It's every young kid's dream to go out on a beautiful day into the grassy field and run around and jump off mountains and climb trees. And I didn't stop to smell the roses when I played that game. And I love that there are experiences like that. And watching my kids play games in that way has been instructive. Again, it's just another way in which you think kids are going to slow you down down or like keep you out of the things that you like to do or whatever. But for me, it ended up being like a redoubling of my interest. Like they reflect that back at me and show me new things about it. Like, oh yeah, this is cool. I should play Zelda like this. Like I'm just gonna wander around like it's kung fu, you know. I don't need to beat this.
Yeah. You mentioned, I guess, games that blew you away, mind-blowing games, mind-blowing experiences. I'll put you on the spot. Can you think of a few games that sort of did that to you throughout your life? Like games that you go back to is like, oh my God, that opened my mind. That was revelatory.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of like the earliest games when I was a kid. Weirdly, like Ninja Gaiden, the cutscenes, but also the brutal difficulty of that game. Like that's a game that I would rent that game from the grocery store and then pretend to be sick so that I could stay home from school and spend all day trying to beat it and like never beat it and take it back to the grocery store. But I was attracted to the world of that game. There was something about the art and the cutscenes. That whole era where you could be drawn into a game not because of the way the game looked, but because of like the instruction booklet art or like the drawing on the cover. all that stuff really fired up my imagination. The original Legend of Zelda, which was baffling to me when I was 8 or 9, I struggled through, but I used to just pore over that manual because the art made you feel like when you were playing it, you would imagine that that's what you're playing. You're playing this amazing looking dark 70s kind of cartoon. That's what I thought it reminded me of. But you know, later on, I mean, obviously, Ocarina of Time, Grand Theft Auto 3, open world games at the beginning were a revelation to me. Yeah, Metroid Prime. I mean, I'm just listing off games. Maybe my favorite, most recent game that I would like put up there with other like, you know, top tier experiences in my gaming life was the immersive sim Prey. Did you ever play that?
Yeah, I haven't played Prey. I've heard a lot about it. One of my friends, Chris Plant, talks very highly about it.
I love an immersive sim. I don't know if you've never played a game like this. It's like BioShock,
right?
Is a famous one. They're usually in first person. Deus Ex. In some ways, Breath of the Wild is an immersive sim because the idea is you have all these systems you can play with and they interact in various ways. There's not just one way of going about winning or getting through the game. You can do lots of things. But Prey was like on a space station. It was kind of like, imagine if Mark Zuckerberg like had a space station, or like Jeff Bezos or one of these Silicon Valley guys and did science experiments outside of the reach of, you know, regulation, and it got out of control and things went haywire. It's just a really amazing world to explore, but also the combat in the game is really stressful and weird, and you have to figure out how to get by. It's not, you know, you're not going to just like Call of Duty it. You're not just going to walk around and like shoot people. It's a game where you got to sneak, you got to hack, you got to do all these things. But it's just a killer world, and I think of that game all the time. I wish I could. It's one of those games I wish I could like erase my brain and play it again because it was just a joy. I think learning is another part of this equation, though. Like I'm a big. If I called myself an autodidact, that sounds kind of like a little inflationary of my ego, but I've always like learned things myself more than being taught by other people. And I think it's because I have this style of learning that I got from video games where you just sort of like throw spaghetti at the wall. You experiment until you figure it out. Like maybe back when I was a kid, you know, you'd rent a game and it didn't even come with the instruction manual because it's a rental, right? So you're like just trying, there's no tutorial. You're like, you rent Final Fantasy 1 from the grocery store. Good luck, kid. Like no one's ever told you what leveling is or anything. You just have to like go out there and press buttons and see what happens. And I'm that kind of person when it comes to learning. I learn through experience, and games really like taps into that, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think And I've read this in several places, I think more recently, is like the concept of failure is sort of thrown out the window. Like games allow you to fail. And a lot of games lean into failure as a way to learn. Going back to Elden Ring or anything from FromSoft, these games that are just like ultra hard, the whole point is to fail. And I think that we've had that growing up with games, forever, at least games where outside of the arcade where you don't want to fail in an arcade because you'll have a limited amount of quarters that you can throw back in the machine unless you're hanging out with your dad in the bar where it seems to be endless. But with a home console, you could do it forever and just keep going and going and going and learning from that mistake and pushing forward. And that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and that's really on a core level. I think most games are about learning. I mean, you might not be learning anything useful, but you're kind of like teaching your brain to deal with a system or deal with the controls to parse what it is that you need to do to get to the next area or whatever. And I crave that. I'm a lifelong learning kind of guy. Like I said, I'm like learning music theory right now. I've been making music forever. I just always want to be learning something. It makes me happy. I feel a lack of satisfaction in my life if I'm not figuring something new out. I want to be I'm trying to stay on the upswing and avoid the downswing in life for as long as possible. Once you stop learning new things, you just crystallize into some shitty version of your former self. You just get smaller and smaller. You got to keep taking it in, keep learning, and don't be baffled by all the new weird things, which is hard. It's really hard. I mean, I look at all this like AI stuff out there now, and I feel a real old man, like urge to just turn it off. Like, I don't care. Yeah. Just shut up. I don't want to hear about it. But at the same time, I'm like, I got to figure out what this is and how maybe it's something I should learn to use. I mean, I know people have like knee-jerk reactions to that stuff, and I'm worried about all that stuff too. But whenever new wrinkles come out, you just got to give it your shot, see if you can still handle it.
What I'm hearing you saying is that you're going to set up a life well wasted TikTok, and the next episode may be written by Chat GPT, which could be kind of cool.
That would be one move. Yeah, I don't mean like fully embracing everything. I just mean, the older you get, the more it becomes apparent that life is just a series of catastrophic events that you have to adapt to. Mm-hmm. And like, I have no urge to live in a post-apocalyptic world where nobody knows how to fucking write a sentence anymore, but like the computer does all the work or whatever. But it's more that I just want to understand what's going on and not give up and start shrinking in that way, I guess. I think a lot of times we use our gut reactions to wall off things that are unfamiliar so that we can stay in that warm bath of the familiar that always, reliably makes you feel good. But I resist that. I push for, understanding what the things are that I have negative reactions to. And sometimes I'm just like, no, I just don't like that,
Yeah.
But yeah.
And that's okay too, right? Like not everything's for you and never has been. No. So this is touching on a little bit about the future. And one of the questions I ask guests is what they're excited about regarding the future of video games. Have you given much thought to that? Is there anything that you see exciting on the horizon or sort of interesting developments or trends in games?
I really like that there are so many hardware options popping up.
Interesting.
It's wild to me that there must be like 15 handheld PC devices for playing games, and a lot of it is geared toward emulation. But like I said earlier, I'm meeting more and more young people who are very interested in the history of games and playing older games. And my own kids, they want to play like Mario 64 and stuff like that. I think it's really cool that there are so many options out there to play with, that it's not just like a Sega versus Nintendo universe or whatever we grew up with. Yeah, I'm pretty interested in, now that text to speech has become so much better, I'm interested in speaking as a mechanic in games, which has been something that people played around with here and there for years. Usually it doesn't work. I can remember like a GameCube game God, what is it called? It starts with an O. Osama. It's not
Okami?
Osama. Okami? No, Okami is the adventure game with the dog.
That's the wolf one, yeah.
Oh my God, I'm blanking here. I just remember I reviewed it for EGM, and it had a microphone for the GameCube that you put on there, and it was a pinball game using Japanese feudal warriors and Odama, that's what it is. Okay, but you had to like command your warriors on the pinball table with the microphone, so you'd be like, press forward. My wife to this day will like make fun of me for that game. She'll be like, press forward out of nowhere, just because she thought it was so dorky. But
oh my God, I'm looking at screenshots of this. I've never heard of this game.
It's fun. I love pinball personally. I have fond memories of that game. I haven't played it in years and years, but I think that speaking as a way of interacting with characters in a game could be really cool and weird. There are things about it that I don't think anyone's really, not anyone, but I don't think many people have imagined. I guess I think of that movie Her. You remember?
Sure. Yep.
Maybe the last optimistic movie about the future that I can remember seeing. It was like the last time anyone had any optimism about the future. But there were these fake games that were made for the movie by that guy who made Mountain, the indie game that would perpetuate like a whole ecosystem. But there were games where he was just like talking to the character a lot, and I think that's interesting. People make fun of like Chat GPT, the like chatting with it somewhat, but I don't know. We live in a lonely world, and so like a game that you can have a conversation with is, you know, has some potential interest. Yeah, I don't know. There's a lot of cool stuff that is probably going to happen soon that I'm going to want to play. I think the games are as promising as they have ever been, and there are just so many kinds of games out there that it's ridiculous that we call them all the same thing. You know, it's like if we only had one word for books, it was like, do you want this novel about math? Like it's strange. There ought to be more descriptive words for games.
Yeah, listeners of the show have heard me say that before. Like, I don't like the fact that we just sit there and call all these types of things video games, but I don't know if there's a better term for it other than like a digital experience or something like that. My first guest, Christian Spicer, called it, you know, we joked about calling them DEs going forward, but it's like there's nothing catchier, and it's just kind of part of the fabric of life now that this medium is called video games. But yeah, it's like there always has been like, what kind of experience do you want? Do you want a platformer? Do you want an adventure game? Do you want a shooter? Like it's gone beyond that now. And I think you're right, like with things like Mountain, or, you know, I don't know if you played Florence at all, which was kind of like a relationship, not sim, but it was like a story, but it was like using interactions on your phone and like natural interactions you would normally have on your phone, but using them to create sort of a story. And there's some game, I forget the name of it, but you use your blinking as the mechanic. So as you open and shut your eyes, it sees that and it will progress the story along. So you can only pay attention to a particular scene for so long because you have to blink. So it's wild that.
I'm playing Dredge right now. Have you heard of Dredge? Yeah, it's a fishing game, but it's also kind of a Victorian horror novel. It's very, very strange combination of things. I don't know that, and then I think of like when I was in my late 20s, having lots of friends over to play Rock Band, or like even better than Rock Band, there was this game Karaoke Revolution that Konami made. That was a karaoke game that you played with a microphone, but it had a mini game that was Pong. You know, the game where like table tennis, where you have two paddles and you pass a ball back and forth, and you're trying to keep it, but you controlled the paddles with your voice.
Whoa.
So if you used a higher pitch, the paddle would go up. If you used a lower pitch, it would go low, and you would play in the room with someone else, right? So you'd be going like but inevitably you would just. It sounded like like a Yoko Ono concert or something, and people would just start cracking up, you know. And you couldn't play it because if you were laughing, then your paddle would go all over the place and you'd end up losing. It was almost like a staring contest. Whoever laughs first loses the game. And I just, the novelty of that stuff, I'm very drawn to interface novelty, any kind of like unusual way to interact with the game. I'm there. Like I was one of those weird people who was like, when the Wii came out, I loved that shit. I was like, yes, I want to stand up and wave my arms around like a maniac. I love all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. We're coming up on time, and I think that's a great place to sort of we're going to leave it in that optimistic area and think about motion controls some more as we depart. But I want to thank you for again taking part in the show and offering your time and chatting to me about this stuff. We veered off into music probably more than I anticipated, but I think that was also appropriate as you are a musician, and again that carries through on your show, A Life Well Wasted. Speaking of A Life Well Wasted, once more, is there more of that show to come? Can we expect more from you?
Yeah, you should expect more. Now, as far as timelines go, that's really hard. I mean, I gotta say, like my current like desire for it is really, if I could put out one a year, that would be lovely. Like that's kind of, to me, it's like a pet. It's not a pet project. It's like an art project. You know, it doesn't have commercials. It doesn't, there's a limited amount of possibility for me making money on it. It's really just a series of shows that I'm making because I'm interested in making them. I like the idea of making them until the title of the show is like literal. You know, like I'll make them until I die, and then it'll be like a record of that. But you know, I imagine I'll go through periods of being more productive with it and less productive with it. But I have been interviewing people for a story that I have going on for it. I'm collecting. I'm sort of in the collecting material phase, which for me takes quite a lot of time, and I usually only end up using like a third of the material that I collect. And I mean at all. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that just never makes it to the point of becoming a story because it just didn't really work out. And it takes me a while to gather up. I wish I had been gathering material for a couple of years before I even put this new one out, and then I'd be in a better position. But as it is right now, I got some good stuff going for it, and I'm also like juggling other podcast stuff because I'm working with a friend of mine on a new show that's not explicitly video game related, but we already have like stories that are video game related. So yeah, I'm working on a new show called Married to the Sea, which is kind of the idea is very A Life Well Wasted-esque. It's kind of take the profile stories in A Life Well Wasted, and it's just those. You know, it's we're looking for people, talking to people who for whom they have some kind of passion for something that almost takes over their life. The phrase married to the sea is like you're a sea captain, you don't have a family, you're married to your job, right? You're out on the ocean, and people end up in that way with lots of hobbies and some professions. Usually it's more of a hobby, and we're working with, you know, an actual production company, and you know, it's like a commercial podcast, so it's a little bit more of a real job compared to A Life Well Wasted. But I want A Life Well Wasted to stay what it is and stay really like creative and different. I want to feel free to just totally do something weird with that show whenever I want to. Yeah, that's kind of how I'm picturing it right now.
That's awesome.
And I'm trying to leverage those like production skills into, you know, making some money now and then. Would be good. Yeah,
wouldn't that be nice, right?
Yeah.
Doing what you love. Well, blessing and a curse, I guess. But
yeah.
All right, Married to the Sea. That's a rad name. The concept sounds awesome. I'm excited to hear it. I'm excited to hear more A Life Well Wasted too. Call me in 10 years if you need any help with anything. But yeah, again, I sincerely appreciate your time. If I sounded any different on the show, it's because I am slightly starstruck by chatting with you. Again, you've had such an impact on my life. So thank you again. And yeah, I guess the last question I have for you before you depart is, where can people find you or find your work?
Yeah. I still have a website because I'm old school as hell. So alifewellwasted.com has all of the episodes. Like I said before, there's no commercial element to it. It's very It's independent media as it existed 10 years ago. I haven't changed anything about it. You can listen to the episodes directly from the website if you want, but they're also on the normal places. Well, they're on Spotify and on the iTunes store. I did end up on Spotify. I don't know how they talked me into that shit, but on the iTunes podcasts as well. And I still have a Twitter account. I don't post a lot because that place bums me out, but I really appreciate connecting with people there. And I have, there are a couple hundred people that I interact with regularly there when I do feel like posting. It's just lately when I get on, I feel this urge to react to things. And my current like style of Twitter is that no matter how bad or whatever is going on in the world that's being talked about on Twitter, I'm not going to react to it personally, publicly. I might react to it privately, talk about it with my friends, but I don't want to get involved in a public conversation about every terrible thing that happens in America because it's exhausting. But I love the community of people there who follow games and who interact with me. I really like folks. If I do tweet these days, it's usually about games. And yeah, that's an easy place to find me. And you'll be able to tell if there's a new thing out. I'll put that stuff up there. Otherwise, I'm not really. I mean, you can find me on Instagram. A Life Well Tasted is my cooking account. I don't post often these days just because my family got tired of me like food styling their dinner. and my son would be 7:30 and it's after soccer practice and I'm trying to take a picture of his dinner and he's like, why? Okay, this is reasonable. I just cook for them.
Well, I'll let your kids continue to run your life and run your life through your kids.
Yeah.
All right, dude. Thank you so much for your time. This was terrific and a dream come true for me. So
happy to talk anytime, man. This was fun.
I cannot thank Robert enough for joining me on Y Button. If you haven't listened to A Life Well Wasted, stop what you're doing right now and go listen. There are only 8 core episodes, so it shouldn't take you terribly long to get through them, and I strongly suggest starting from episode 1. You won't be disappointed, though you may come to ask more of your favorite podcasts after listening. If you enjoyed this episode of the show, please share it with a friend. The easiest thing to do might be to share the website, ybutton.online. It includes links to all the most popular podcast platforms. If you want to get in touch, feel free to reach out to ybuttonpodcast@gmail.com or on Mastodon at ybutton@mastodon.social. You can also find me on Mastodon at Kyle Starr with 2 R's at mastodon.social. This episode was produced by AJ Folari. AJ, thank you. Our theme song was written by Childstar, who's me, featuring my friend Scott Wilkie. The track is called On the Same Page. You can find it on all streaming platforms. Thanks again for listening to Y Button, and remember, when you press Y, ask why.
My voice is really, really bad.
Oh, I don't mind.
Okay.
I like a bad voice.
Okay. Too much partying.
Yeah, understandable. I'm here at the Game Developers Conference in San Francisco, a yearly meetup for much of the gaming industry. It's a pretty boring event if you're not into sitting through talks about advanced techniques in artificial intelligence and staring at PowerPoint presentations all day. But it's a rare opportunity for man-on-the-street interviews about gaming. Practically anyone I run into here is a knowledgeable insider, an expert in the field, and I have a single, simple question. This is like an easy but surprisingly tough to answer question, and the question is, why do you play video games?
Yeah, because it's fun.
Anything else?
Because it's addictive. Because I've done it all my life, and I think it's more fun than watching TV.
Why do I play video games? Because it's fun.
Because it's stimulation. It's really fun, and it's all about making a time when you would be sitting doing nothing exciting.
Because they're fun.
And?
Something to do in your spare time?
Yeah.
You got a lot of spare time.
I don't have a lot of spare time. I'm 30 years old, going on 90, married and juggling odd jobs to make ends meet. I've been playing games regularly since I was 6 or 7. I spent months, probably years of my life, twiddling my thumbs in front of a screen. Games are my default pastime, the thing I do when I've got time to kill, which is rare these days. The thing is, I'm not really sure what I get out of all that time invested. I have no idea why I play, and I worry that it might be for the same reason these guys play.
Get away from reality for a while.
To escape.
Is it that bad?
They're fun and escape from reality, I guess.
All right, I play video games to escape reality, get my mind off things, and because they're mad fun.
Because it's fun. It helps me forget about my life, my horrible life.
That's a non-inspiring. Is that depressing?
No, it's great.
Why do you play video games?
To fight the boredom and monotony of day-to-day existence.
Do you feel like it contributes to your life in any way? Do you feel like no?
No, it just helps to get away from the day-to-day monotony of the horror of existence.
I like this answer. Okay, thanks.
I thought you might.
Welcome to A Life Well Wasted, an internet radio show about video games and the people who love them. I'm your editor and host, Robert Ashley, and this is episode 3, Why Game?
Ooh, that's a big question. It's a big-ass question. It's relieve boredom.